I've seen lots of videos on YouTube about how to plant winter bulbs indoors, but I haven't seen many videos showing the journey of those bulbs that have been planted and how they turn out. So I'm kind of nearing the end of my first phase of winter bulb planting, and I'm quite happy with the progress. I think it's super interesting. So I'm recording this video just to show this point of time, obviously quite some time after planting, and then I'm going to show various other phases of these bulbs here and the next batch of bulbs that I plant, which are going to be tulips. So let's start with the bulbs that have been planted in a kind of hydroponics style. So there's two batches here. First of all, these ones, which have been planted in actual hyacinth vases. So they're sold and marketed as hyacinth vases. And then this second batch here, which are actually in they're not hyacinth vases. They were actually sold in a garden centre in Morden in South London and marketed as pretzel shakers. So I think the idea is that you would have like peanuts in there or pretzels or some small nibbles, and you would have these on a tabletop if you were having a party or something, and people would like pour some out into their hand. So that's what these things are. I doubt that they would be very successful in that purpose, but that's what they were. But I saw them and they were much cheaper than these things that are dedicated to the purpose. So I thought I would just have a go and see how it worked. Now, so they're both hyacinths. They're both the same bulbs, and we can see that there's a huge difference in progress between the two batches. And the closest batch were actually planted first. So those vases were planted on the 25th of September, which was 15 weeks ago. And as you can see, we do have roots having developed in the vase, and they were quite quick to develop actually, but we do not have very much progress with the growth of the actual plant itself. This one here is a little bit more progressed in terms of its roots. They look a little bit more vigorous, but again, we don't have very much progress. Now, these ones here on your left have got much more vigorous root growth and much more vigorous plant growth, and we can see the first one has properly flowered, and the second one is flowering already. Now they were planted on when were they planted? The 16th of October. So that was like 3 to 4 weeks after these, and they've progressed much more vigorously. I suspect these won't flower. They don't look like, they've been at this stage now for a few weeks and it doesn't look like anything's going to happen. Obviously these are in flower now, and it seems to have worked. So this is the first time I've grown bulbs in vases like this in only water, and it's worked, right? Now it's just water, so I haven't added anything into this water. I have with these ones I actually replaced fully the water because it was apparent early on that they were not doing very well, so I thought I would just completely change the water. Whereas these ones, I haven't replaced it, I've just lifted up gently the bulbs and then poured in some water, trying to keep it off the bulb because you can't have, you're not supposed to have water touching the bulb itself. So when I planted these straight first off, the water just went up to the bottom of the bulb. It just touched it as if the bulb's bottom was just gently dipping in the water, but literally just touched it, just kissing the water. Now, all of these hyacinths, I started them off in a shady area, and then once the roots were developed fully, I moved them into the display position, like where I was going to put them. So I kind of had them underneath shelves or behind the sofa type thing, not in the dark, but in a shady position just while the roots developed, because I think the fear with indoor bulbs is that you get the plant growth before you've got sufficient root growth, and then if that happens, the roots can't support the plant and the plant turns out being weak. So the idea is if you put them in the shade, they're not going to flower, but the roots will grow in those conditions. So that's the principle that I was following. Whether or not it's true or not is another thing. But so basically, I realised that it was time to move them into their final position when the roots were really vigorous, and the roots tended not to grow more past a certain point. So why have these not done well and these have done well? My theory is because the aperture of this vase here, that is the space that the roots have got to grow down, is much narrower than here. And when I say much narrower, like probably in total 1 centimetre, something like that. And I think what this has effectively done is, because it's got this narrow aperture, the roots so at the bottom of the bulb you have what's called the root plate, which is the area that the roots will come out from. The root plate here is kind of masked by the rim of the vase, and so they've not been able to push down because they're effectively on top of the glass, or maybe they weren't stimulated by the water and didn't grow. So we've got a much narrower amount of root coming out of these than we have here, and you can see, right, the roots here are coming right from the edge, whereas here they're clearly not. So that's my theory. We didn't get enough root development on these because the aperture of these hyacinth vases is too narrow. So that would suggest the hyacinth vases are no good. I don't know if I'm correct here, but anyway, from the experiment that I've done, that's what this shows. Another thing to comment on is there were 3 of these, and the 4th one actually rotted. So it went black and the water became stagnant and was really smelly, so I threw that away. So all in all, these have not worked, whereas these seem to have done great. And looking at the bottom of these, there doesn't seem to be any black either. So that is, they look really healthy. So that's hyacinths. Now you can see here that this hyacinth, I've wired it. Now I don't know how obvious that is for you to see. So you can see, look, I've got this wire going around it to hold it up because it collapsed. Now, I do not believe that is a symptom of planting it in water, because you can see, hopefully just in frame over here, is a hyacinth in soil that has also collapsed, and the 2 others next to it are wired too. So this, I think, shows that depending on whether you plant them in water or in soil, doesn't really affect whether the hyacinths will collapse or not. I did have another batch of hyacinths in soil, pink ones that are not in this video. They're kind of dead now. They've finished flowering and have dried out. they didn't collapse, but these white ones have, so I think it probably depends on the variety. These stems are quite flimsy, whereas on the pink ones the stems are really stiff. So I think it depends on the plant rather than the growing medium or the growing conditions. So so you can see I've wired this, and I was conscious of this from the beginning because I grew some hyacinths last year in soil and they collapsed then too. And so I was thinking, this is not gonna, and I actually supported them with chopsticks. So I was thinking, when I plant these in vases, what am I going to do about supporting them when if they collapse? And so it occurred to me that I could use training wire to tie around them. And so I looked at bonsai wire, but bonsai wire seems a bit more of a luxury, and it's, depending on what one you get, it's not so maskable, whereas I got this, so this is 3.5mm general purpose wire. It's coated in green plastic, so I guess the it looks like, including the plastic, it's 3.5mm, and I just thought that would be better because, I mean, you can still see it, but if this was silver wire it would be much more obvious, or you could use copper bonsai wire, but anyway, I got this. It felt cheap. So I'm actually going to wire that on video. So these three here planted in soil. So they're planted in bulb fibre, which is a low nutrient soil, I believe, and they've done great. So they were planted on the 11th of September. So that's actually quite some time before these. So the pots, they were planted 16 weeks ago, and vase 2 was planted 12 weeks ago. So that's quite a big difference of planting time so the pots are more advanced, but only a little bit, and it's interesting how these have effectively grown faster, and my expectation is that these would grow less fast because they're in a less nutrient rich growing medium. So you've just got water. The bulb fibre, although it's low nutrient, I'm sure it's got more nutrients than the water, and so the expectation is that these would have been more vigorous, but in fact they were less vigorous. So that's interesting. Let me see if I've covered all of the notes that I wanted to put here. So yeah, one of the reasons these might have been a bit slower is they could have been in a slightly more shady spot than these. It's difficult to know if that's true or not, but that could be it. That's them. So let's do the wire, and I can show you how I did that. So to be honest, it's quite difficult, and I don't think I did a brilliant job of it, but it looks better than the chopsticks, because you kind of needed 3 chopsticks to stick in the soil, and then you needed to tie a bit of string around the top. And it was messy and ugly, to be honest, and didn't really work. And this is quite good because you can kind of adjust it. So they move a bit, and you can kind of adjust it as necessary. So I'm going to get this started because it's more difficult to do it when it's in there, and it's difficult not to break the flower too. So I'm going to have it open. So it's not closed, and when I get it around I'm going to close it. And then we just need to check how high it needs to be. So let's just gauge that. So that's too much. So let's chop a bit off. I can feel the top of that flower stem is a bit bent. So even if I manage to get this up, it might still bend over. So that feels perhaps still a little bit long. Let's just take a bit more off. Alright, and then get it away so we're not messing with the roots too much, and then let's just scoop it around. Be careful with the flowers. So there we are. So you should probably be able to see that the wire is obscuring the flower. So it's not really ideal. So we could just leave it, because we can, if that's facing the back, it doesn't matter. Or we could just make it a bit lower. So let's just make it a bit lower. So it's still open, so it should be fairly easy to get this out. If I can get through this process without breaking any flowers, that would be hugely desirable. Alright, let's try again. That could be a bit. So I guess this is going to pull it so it doesn't. That is better, I reckon. Yeah, that is better. So let's just move that into view, and I'll just move it around. So it's kind of ugly to have the wire there, but you don't really have any choice. And then look at this one. It's could do with moving a bit to the left. So let's see if we can bend that. So that's a bit more straight up. So I'm quite happy with this approach. I think that's worked quite well. So that is the hyacinths. So let's move on to, and then just one more point about these hyacinths. They're all temperature treated from a nursery. I got the bulbs. Not all nurseries have them, but I found them in the Lower Morden Garden Centre, and also I think it's the Finchley Garden Centre too. So they have big bins of bulbs, and it's like a pick and mix actually, and they have these paper bags. Some of them even have like throwaway disposable gloves for you to pick up the hyacinths, because the bulbs can cause an irritation for some people. So the heat treating means that they've been chilled for, I don't know how long you chill hyacinth bulbs, perhaps something like 8 to 10 weeks. And that chilling simulates going through the winter, so that when you plant them, the temperature is such that, because they've been cold for 10 weeks, they think it's spring, and that's what results in them flowering. If you just buy bulbs in a bag, ready kind of package in the garden centre, then they won't have been temperature treated. So you're going to have to treat them yourself, which means putting them in the fridge for 10 weeks. So I've actually got some tulips that I bought like that in the fridge at the moment, that I planted in, when did I plant them? In last week of September. So when when these have all finished, I've got basically a batch of tulips in the fridge waiting to go into pots, and I'll grow them. So the idea is that I'll have something growing for the whole of the winter indoors. So the temperature treating is necessary to get bulbs to flower at a time when they wouldn't naturally flower. That's the point of it. Okay, so let's move on to the amaryllis. So I've got 3 amaryllis types here, and actually I've just realised I've forgotten one, so I'm just going to go and get it. So you can see the amaryllis that I forgot. So let's talk through the process here. This amaryllis here in the middle is actually one that I bought in the garden centre, the Birch and Grove Garden Centre in North London, in Wembley, and it was already, it already had a stem in it. The stem was about that high. It was a white amaryllis, it was gorgeous, and it had multiple flowers coming out of it, which flowered a little bit staggered. So the whole flowering experience lasted for a while. And then when it finished flowering, I cut off the flowers. Now you can see that I've done that on these ones here. I'll just move this down a little bit so you can see. Hopefully at the top you can see the little things poking out of the top of the stem. That's where the flowers came from. So I cut the flowers off so that I was left only with the stem. There were no leaves, so it just had this poking up. And so this basically went yellow over time. It's quite stiff, but the water and the nutrients in the stem drained back into the bulb. And then once it finished and it was really yellow and limp, then I just snipped it off. And at that point, that's when these leaves grew, and they're quite massive. Now, they grew really quickly, and I've got this near a windowsill, and so the leaves are all kind of, it looks like it's falling over, but it's not. It's just all of the leaves are orientated towards the window to photosynthesize, and what's happening there is that I guess it's producing sugar. I'm not an expert at these things, but I hear people talking about that a lot. So I guess that this is producing sugar and sending the sugar down into the bulb, and it's actually going to be producing a kind of embryonic flower. So what you'll notice of amaryllis is when they kind of push up, you have a kind of flower bud already formed. So you can see this stem is pushing up now, and well, maybe you can't. You can see that stem is pushing up now, but that was pretty much there all the way from the bottom. So that's in the bulb. So this plant at the moment is doing the work of producing the flower for next year. So it's really important if you want to reuse them, and they're really expensive amaryllis bulbs. Like these were like £9 each, although not this one. It's really important that you let that process happen. So this is just by one of my windowsills, and I'll just leave it there and water it once a week, and feed it as well once a week. with a liquid plant food. You can see this leaf is dying. I don't know why that is. Perhaps it's not in a good position. Perhaps I've not watered it enough, I don't know. Maybe it's just like the first leaf or something, and maybe that's it. Maybe it's like on a plant, when you get the first leaf, it never really lasts very long, and it's different to all the others. I don't know. So these are in quite small pots, and I've got quite bad fungus gnats on this amaryllis. So I've put on the top a dressing of clay beads, which I got from Soil Ninja. Seems to be really good value online. But I've got a few white pebbles in there as well, just to give a little bit more colour contrast. It was kind of accidental that happened, but I think it looks nice. So hopefully that will keep off the fungus gnats. So that's the end of this one, and that was Hypistrum denver, or Amaryllis denver, and it has some other names: belladonna lily, or naked lady lily, or March lily. I'm not sure how helpful that is, but anyway. So that was one that I bought ready in the pot. Then I've got these. So these were bulbs that I bought online from a place called J. Parker, and it's quite cool. They've got a massive variety of bulbs. Anything I would warn you about is they took ages to get delivered. I think they took about 6 to 8 weeks to get delivered. So if you're wanting to plant these, make sure you get them in advance. They're also really expensive. So these were like between £8 and £9 each, these bulbs. I think even that one that was already planted and in growth cost more or less the same. And in Sainsbury's and Waitrose, I've seen amaryllis bulbs in boxes, and they're like between £5 to £7. So these seemed really expensive. However, I'm very much convinced that these are bigger than the ones that you get from the supermarket. They've been, I think, really successful. So what I've done is I've just used these nice white pots that I got from Homebase, which were like, I don't know how much they cost, about £7 each. So they're really nice, I think. Really simple and plain, and the point is to draw attention to the flower, not the pot, so I don't really want a decorative pot. Then I've got inside there just flower pots left over from stuff that I've bought, and I've put at the bottom of the pot a layer of these little white pebbles, which I bought from Homebase as well, which are quite cheap. And then the soil, which is bulb fibre mixed with zeolite. And then on the top, a dressing of the stones. So let me explain the rationale between that stuff. So the stones at the bottom are for drainage, and the stones at the top are to keep the surface dry, which would hopefully result in no fungus gnats. The zeolite is something I've discovered that is sold by a place called Soil Ninja, and I found it because I was looking for pumice alternatives, or cheap pumice, and I couldn't find it. So basically the cheapest place in the UK I can find pumice is actually Soil Ninja, so it's the cheapest I can find. I've searched quite a lot. And the reason for pumice is that it's very light, white stone with holes in it, which has various benefits. So it helps with drainage, so getting the water to go through the soil so that it doesn't stay wet, because bulbs don't like soil that's too wet because it can make them rot. So it can do that, but it can also like retain water as well, which means that if you forget to water, the actual pumice itself kind of has some water in it. It sounds a little bit contradictory and a little bit confusing, but I think the fun of growing stuff is testing things out, so it's not always necessary for everything to add up 100%. The other thing is that the pumice, the air holes in it mean that it can, it basically allows air in the soil, and the air is what will feed various bacteria. So it's really important to have air in the soil. So that's another benefit, but it's really expensive. So I think from Soil Ninja, which by the way is the cheapest I can find, it's about £19 for 10 litres. Zeolite is about £15 for 10 litres, and it seems to have pretty much the same properties, although the holes are smaller. I don't know if that necessarily causes a problem. Anyway, I've got that in there. So that's the soil and the growing medium. Now I have still got fungus gnats here, so it wasn't completely successful, this stone on the top, although there don't seem to be any now, so maybe that's okay. One of the things that I've found can cause fungus gnats is having a pot situation like this, where you've got a decorative pot and then a plot that you've planted something in, but they're really close fitting. And then if you do get some water drainage, it kind of goes down to in between the pot and the decorative pot, and you get little bits of compost in there as well that drain through, and I think that might attract the fungus gnats. But actually these seem okay now, so I'm not really sure if that's an issue, but this is another thing that encouraged me to order the clay beads in the end, because this didn't seem to be working. So anyway, that's the planting medium. So I planted these as bulbs with nothing sprouting, and put them in a fairly shady spot in my living room, but not dark, and watered them very sparingly. And the idea there is that the roots were developing before the plant growth, so that those roots would be there to feed the plant once it did come. So none of these bulbs had any roots on, they were just, the roots had literally been chopped off. They're all only semi-submerged in the soil because they don't want to get too wet. So how long did they take to flower? So these are apricot parfait bulbs from J. Parker's, and they were kind of like white flowers with peach outline. The peach outline doesn't last that long and turns pink for me. They were planted, how long ago were they planted? 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks ago they were planted, and they were planted 13 weeks ago and flowered after 8 weeks. So they were planted in the 9th of October and then flowered 8 weeks after that. So they flowered before Christmas, which was a little bit unsuccessful for me because I wanted this stuff in flower for Christmas. That was the point of it. But you can't really judge it, and so it doesn't matter. They flowered with one stem. So this wasn't here, this is developed later. Flowered with one stem that came up, and then there were 4 flowers coming out of it in a very geometric pattern, one from each side. They all flowered at the same time pretty much, and the flowers lasted just under 2 weeks, something like that. it's not that long. And then when the flowers had finished, I cut them, as I did the one over there, and put them on the windowsill. And what my expectation was that the stem would wither, and then I would cut it off, and then I would get leaves coming out like I did that one. But that didn't happen. So you can see here, this is the same. On this was actually more advanced than this, because I gave this to a friend who gave it back to me after flowering because I wanted the bulb back and the pot. I'll give it back to him next year. I think it was because he put it in a sunnier place than me. It's not, I'm not exactly sure, but anyway, it was much more advanced, so it flowered before mine. And what I found is that this new, instead of leaves, we had a new stem coming up, a new flower stem. And consequently, I've cut off the old stem on this one so we can see that only now the flower stem. So that's pretty cool. So this one we've got a second flower, and I suspect that after this flower has finished, I'll do the same. I'll cut the flowers, the stem will wither, and then we'll get leaves, but we will see. Maybe we'll just keep going on. So yeah, so that's basically what's going on there. So let's get these out of the way and then move on to the final amaryllis. So another amaryllis from J. Parker. So this one is called Apple Blossom, I think. Let me just check my notes. Apple Blossom. So less vigorous than the others. This is the first flower stem. Again, it was in a shady place, but it's been much slower to make a stem. This is in a bowl that I got from IKEA, and the growing medium is the same. So at the bottom we've got these white stones, then in the middle we've got the bulb fibre with zeolite, and then we've got the stones on top. It's been in shade. Let me see. I don't know if there's anything much more to say about this, to be honest. Yeah, I think that's it. So those are all of my bulbs from this year. And then before I stop recording, I just want to show one more thing, or maybe two more things that's quite interesting. So I'm doing bonsai at the moment, and so one of the things I'm doing is looking out for cheap trees that I can turn into bonsai. And so I've been looking in supermarkets for reduced live Christmas trees, and this is one that I got from Sainsbury's. Now, it doesn't look like it was watered for the whole time it was in Sainsbury's, and consequently it's really dropping its needles. Give it a shake, you can see. So I've just had it in the house. My house is freezing at the moment, so it's not too hot, and I've just been watering it. Well, it's funny because I just keep watering it and it doesn't really get much wetter. So hopefully that's having a good effect, and I will eventually put this outside once it looks like it can handle it, and it won't just, all the needles won't just come off in the wind. But I just wanted to show it because it's quite cute. So it's got this little dangly, it's like string with some little fibre optic lights in it, powered by a little battery. I just think it looks gorgeous. And I've got these on my mantelpiece. So these might appear in a later video. So there we are. That's the end of my Christmas flowering bulbs. And I will record a second video soon showing, I guess, the next stage of these ones, and then going on to my tulips.